everybody, welcome to episode 1 of Moonlight Mysteries, where we talk about all things mysterious, paranormal, and supernatural. I'm your host, Jackie Mage, and today we are going to be talking about the oh-so-mysterious fairy circles. Fairy circles are also known as fairy rings, elf circles, and pixie rings. Typically, it is an arc or circle of mushrooms that you can find in forests or grasslands. In fairy ring folklore, these places are known as very hazardous or dangerous. Most of the time, they're associated with fairies, witches, or even the devil, depending on where the folklore is coming from. Different countries have different traditions and superstitions about where these fairy circles are, what creates them, and what it means if you step into one or if you try to destroy one. In German tradition, these rings were thought to be places where witches danced in circles, and in Dutch tradition, this is where the devil would sit his milk churn. The French even thought that these rings were guarded by giant bug-eyed toads that would curse anybody who came close to or inside the circles. The mushroom circles were always related to either witches or fairies, mostly because both creatures were known to dance in circle-like formations. It seems like each of the different countries had their own dark thing that would happen to somebody if you interfered with one of these circles. Some townsfolk thought that these rings were only associated with nighttime and the moonlight, and actually meant nothing if you were to step in them in the daytime. I also want to note that at this time, fairies were not thought of as cute and happy beings like we see in modern media like Tinkerbell and things like that. They were very kind of ugly and mischievous, sometimes gnome looking. A lot of times we think of a fairy being as a dainty little creature with like little fairy wings, and some nations thought of it like that, but most actually thought of little gnome men or basically little goblins. As superstitions became more popular in Scotland, people started to believe different things about these circles and started to speculate on what the fairies actually did with them and how they were literally created. For example, one Scottish man insisted that these mushrooms were the dinner top places for fairies to eat their food and sit down together. Another man thought they were just the stools that they sat on in a circle to conduct rituals. A Welsh woman even insisted that she'd seen fairies using these mushrooms as their umbrellas or parasols. Fairy circles began to be so associated with witches and the supernatural that some places even started to make up songs and rhymes about them. I don't know how to say this one because I'm not Scottish, but on the screen is a traditional Scottish rhyme that talks about fairy circles. In general, there are tons of stories that people have ranging back thousands of years from things that happened to them or their family members when they encountered these circles. Some people say that these circles have to be made of mushrooms, but some people think that you can also find them being circles of rocks or even circles of water on the ground. Some say that when you enter a fairy circle, you may never be able to leave and you will just be permanently stuck in limbo inside the circle while invisible to the world around you. The only way to get out of a fairy circle once trapped inside is from intervention from outside forces like somebody coming to your rescue. Some places thought that sprinkling thyme or other types of herbs inside the circle while somebody was trapped inside is actually the best way to free them. Others thought you would have to wrap a rope around them without actually touching the circle yourself and yank them clean out of the circle to have any chance of saving them. Most folklore just entails people coming across misfortune after going into these circles on accident. People would unwillingly and unknowingly walk through them on their path to the village or anywhere else they were going and be cursed thereafter. Some people thought you would lose an eye. Some people thought that if you were a thief or murderer and had done anything bad in your life to that point, that you would be caught in the near future. It was also said that if you walked through fairy circles, the fairies who had originally made that circle would come find you at your house in the night and tear up all your clothes and your items and basically trash your residence. Once the superstitions about these circles grew in popularity, people were said to start bringing iron tools with them wherever they went, just in case they walked through or encountered a fairy circle. It was believed that iron would burn the skin of fairies and chase them away. These circles are also associated with time skips, where if you got stuck inside, you may feel like you're in there for 5 minutes, but you were actually in there for an extended amount of time. People even claim that they were trapped in one for days, weeks, months, or even years. Some people who believe heavily in the fae and fairy rings think that maybe they got their missing person or family member swallowed up by one of these in the forest. Fairy forts are something that are also closely related to fairy circles. They're basically fairy houses, but not like cute little houses that we're used to seeing that are little sculpted structures of things that we know, but they look like more natural things such as riverbeds or just interesting, really beautiful spots in nature where fairies or small critters can hide under. People who believe in fae creatures often warn their family members and children against disturbing really beautiful natural places in case it happened to be a fairy fort. People were afraid that these fairy forts actually had the capability of transferring people from their own realm into the fairy realm. People were very keen on not messing with certain areas that they believed fairies inhabited as their homes. If a farmer found that a lot of his cattle were dying from unknown reasons, he would graze his cattle in other parts of his land, believing that potentially there was a fairy fort nearby. It was believed that cattle often would get sick and die if they ate any part of the vegetation around fairy forts or anywhere where fairies did not want them to be. Fairy paths are just what they sound like. They're paths or trails that fairies follow through the forest or grasslands to get from place to place. Usually nothing actually marks these paths. There's no way to tell with the naked eye where a fairy path is. People believe that if a family was experiencing a lot of misfortune, that their house may actually be in the way of a fairy path. Some farmers actually reported that when building extensions to their farmhouses were burned down. Building any sort of human structure in the way of these paths was believed to curse your entire family and bring death. A lot of farmers made double doors on either side of their barn just for the purpose of leaving them open at night, so that just in case there was a fairy path nearby, the fairies could walk through the doors and not get mad at the owners of the farm. Some families decided to try and fight the fairies instead of run away. Some people said that their houses got burnt down 2 times until the fairies were warded off. It was thought that if you let the fairies burn down your structure 2 times, they would not burn it down a 3rd time and would give up and create a new fairy path. So now let's talk about some stories from real people who think that their lives were interrupted by fairy circles. So the story goes that a young boy and his father were fishing by a lake that was about half a mile away from their family home. The scenery was beautiful, they were fishing peacefully all day, except the boy started to get tired and more tired than his father. His father wanted to keep fishing, but the boy wanted to go home, so he started to walk back himself. This was also very close to nightfall, so it wasn't quite pitch dark yet, but it was getting pretty dark. He had been this way multiple times through the forest, but never this late at night. He started walking through, expecting that he would be home in 10 to 15 minutes max, but he found himself walking for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and he started to panic, thinking that he'd gotten lost in the forest. He started to run, but as he ran, he noticed that he kept seeing the same things around him over and over again. The same trees, the same rocks, and the same patterns they had been. He realized that he might be running in a circle. He did his best to try to make his way in a straight line towards his home, but still an hour had gone by and he had not felt like he made any progress at all. Eventually, the boy stopped and sat down as he became really exhausted from running through the forest. He resigned himself to the fact that he was probably lost and would be found tomorrow by his father in the daylight. The boy ended up laying on the ground and going to sleep for the night. Thankfully, this story took place in the summertime, so sleeping through the night in the forest would be unpleasant, but it wouldn't kill you. When the boy woke up the next morning, he got up and started making his way through the forest once again. And very quickly, within 5 minutes, he found his way out and could see his house. When he headed inside, he expected his parents to be mad at him, thinking that he had run away for the night to go play or do whatever he wanted to do. His parents were actually ecstatic to see him when they got there. He was very happy that they weren't upset at him, but he didn't understand why they were that happy to see him after one night. He definitely thought he was going to get in trouble for causing mischief. After talking about what happened for a while and explaining to his parents how he thought he was going in circles and felt lost, his parents were stunned that he had never actually come across a river, built a shelter, anything, because according to them, he had been gone for 3 weeks. The boy insisted that he'd only slept there for one night and never even got hungry and only a little bit thirsty on his journey. He didn't have a scratch on his body and he was fairly well kept, considering that his parents thought he was in the woods for 3 weeks. After a few days of being missing, the parents sought the help of the townfolk and a search party was started throughout the woods nearby their house to try and find him, and they found nothing the entire time he was gone. Eventually, the search was called off and everybody presumed that he had succumbed to the elements. The boy's family wasn't particularly superstitious and did not believe in fairy tales or anything of the supernatural kind. But some of the townsfolk adamantly believed that the boy had walked through a fairy circle and had been in the fairy realm for 3 weeks. Thankfully, nothing bad ever happened to the boy or his family after this incident. One girl who lived in the United States in the late 1800s named Melissa Porter had a story of her own from her family's property where she found her brother supposedly stuck in a fairy circle. Melissa was about 10 years old and she was playing in the fields behind her house with her young brother, 8-year-old Ethan. Both children were playing and having fun when all of a sudden Ethan froze. Melissa waited for him to get out of this trance-like state, believing that he was just staring at something on the ground. But after a few minutes of him not moving, she ran over to him. She kept continuously calling his name, Ethan, 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 what are you doing? But he was actually frozen still in place. He wasn't even blinking, and Melissa couldn't even tell if he looked like he was breathing or not. At first, Melissa thought that her brother was pranking her, and she started to play along. She reached in and tried to tickle him and move him, but no matter what she did, he gave her absolutely no reaction. What really started to freak Melissa out was that Ethan's eyes were open and staring at the exact same spot on the ground without moving or blinking at all. Melissa eventually didn't know what to do and went to go get her parents. When they came outside of the house, they also saw that Ethan was just standing there and not moving at all. His dad came over and tried to pick him up off the ground to get him to move, but he actually couldn't lift him at all. Again, Ethan was only 8 years old, and his father should have been able to pick him up and move him at least a little bit to get him out of that exact position, but he couldn't. Ethan was like stone in place. It was almost like he was a statue. He wasn't moving, he wasn't breathing, and he couldn't be picked up or lifted at all. While the family was trying to figure out what was going on, Melissa looked down and saw that one of her brother's feet was encircled in a ring of mushrooms, only about a foot in diameter. Melissa had heard of the superstitions surrounding fairy rings and instantly started to pluck the mushrooms out of the ground. Instantly, when she plucked the last one out of the ground, Ethan became unfrozen and fell over. His family scrambled to him and asked him what happened and if he was okay. The boy looked really confused, like nothing had happened at all. He didn't really know what they were talking about. They questioned him on why he was being so still and why he was acting that way, but he had no idea what they were talking about. In the near future, really bad things started to happen to Ethan and Melissa specifically. Both of them started to experience bullying at school, and their grades began to drop for no discernible reason. While playing with other girls outside, Melissa actually broke both of her arms at one time when she tripped and fell down an embankment. While recovering from this traumatic injury, Ethan also got injured. No matter what he did, he seemed to keep getting burned. Now, he was only 8 years old, so he wouldn't have been cooking in the kitchen with his mom or have much of a reason to be around fire at all. But he found that no matter what he did, he kept getting little burns all over his arms, whether it was reaching for something on the counter over the stove or just getting burnt by something he thought should not have been hot. Shortly after these experiences, Ethan almost died in a tragic accident. Ethan and his family were having a normal day at the river, which was not unheard of for them, as they would go down there to have family time in the spring all the time. While playing in the shallows, Ethan slipped and fell into the water, which usually wasn't a very big deal, as he could stand up on his own. But this time, there was actually no ground beneath him at all. He had fallen into a deep part of the river that he did not expect to sweep him away. Ethan was swept downstream really quickly and thought he was going to drown, when eventually he was able to get his footing and pull himself out. Ethan was actually a pretty good swimmer for his age and was surprised at how much he had struggled to get out of the water. He had froze up, very similar to how he felt when he was in the fairy circle. He couldn't move, but it felt like no time was passing at all. He almost felt like he was in a trance, and that he was just floating along peacefully, but he was also well aware that he was underwater for an extended period of time. Eventually, when he got out, he didn't even breathe hard, but Ethan had actually floated miles downstream. I wasn't able to find anything else about this story after that incident, but I hope Melissa and her family were able to make a full recovery from the effects of stepping in that fairy circle. So that is it on fairy circles. If you guys have any personal stories about something you've experienced with fairy circles, please leave them down in the comment section below. I would love to hear your stories, and I may even tell them in my upcoming videos. Like I said, this is the first episode of Moonlight Mysteries, and I hope to start posting twice a week. So if you like what you see here in this video, please subscribe, leave a comment, turn your notification bell on, and come back